You published a report with Zillow last week about inventory of new home building. And it has some very interesting sort of like kind of, I'd say like the regions involved, in either, permits going up or permits going down. I thought was really fascinating. I mean, I'll kind of get you started, like drawing from your data. Among the largest 50 metropolitan markets, Jacksonville, San Antonio, Boston, Denver, and St. Louis have seen the largest pullback in single family permits in the first 6 months of the year compared to last year. And on the other side, there are markets that are growing, and in some cases growing rapidly. Kansas City, which is interesting because a friend of mine just moved to Kansas City, and not that there's anything wrong with Kansas City. It's a perfectly great place. I just thought that was a curious place to relocate. Orlando, Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, and Oklahoma City. Pittsburgh and Cincinnati, somewhat almost sister cities, a lot in common. Oklahoma City seems to be a town on the rise, and people always seem to be going toward Orlando. Orlando just has had a tremendous amount of momentum. But what do you make of the data with regard to those that are losing and those that are gaining? What is sort of the thrust for each in either direction?
Well, I mean, look, it's really all about inventory. If you think about, resale inventory, sellers came back this year, basically providing builders some competition after a while where basically builders were able to absorb all of the housing demand because people weren't selling their homes, right? So they were locked in, and they didn't, but this year we start to see kind of new listings, sellers coming back in, of existing inventory coming back in as if it were 2019 again, just back to normal, behavior. They come back during the home shopping season and they pull back during the summer. And so the increase in resale inventory has provided builders a little bit of competition. Now also at the same time, builders got hit. Everybody got hit with the fact that we had a big stock market correction back in March and April. We had a lot of economic uncertainty that actually pulled demand a little bit lower. Demand was lower than expected this home shopping season. So that actually caused the housing inventory, especially new construction inventory, to increase, right? So competition from resale, slowing demand, right? Less than expected demand, caused, builders to feel it a little bit. The share of builders cutting their prices increased. The incentives continue, right? And by incentives, we're talking about putting some money up for closing costs,
right?
Rate buy downs,
yeah,
all that stuff.
Upgrades to finishes and whatever it takes, right?
Right. And so when you look across the country, the markets that are still building a lot of housing are markets that are relatively affordable and where you just haven't seen the big increase in resale inventory, right? Where inventory hasn't accumulated all that much. And so builders are still building there because, well, they expect demand to be there to absorb all the inventory that they're putting on the market. In other places where demand has slowed and you have more inventory than you've had in a long time, I'm thinking about the Texas and Florida markets, Jacksonville, San Antonio, but even Austin, St. Louis, Missouri. But also, St. Louis is one of them where you see a little bit of a slowdown. And but you also look at the Louisiana markets. They're also kind of hit by slowing demand and rising inventory levels. And so those markets are the markets where you see the bigger pullback in new construction.
How much would rates be affecting the consideration of the potential buyer market right now? I mean, obviously, you build a house, somebody's going to be living in that home in probably a year's time from when you break ground, right? I mean, or it's at the very least, it's months. You're making on the builder's side, the consideration is where the needs are going to be. And also
That's right. It's future housing demand. Builders are extremely good at forecasting demand, housing demand. But it's also like the reality of their costs, right? Rising labor costs, material costs, land costs. At the end of the day, there has to be a buyer that's willing to absorb all of that.
Yes, right.
Right. And so if you have buyers that are willing to absorb that, well, builders build. The home builders have been very smart, because what they've done is, in order to keep their costs manageable, they're building on smaller land, right? Land costs have risen. So they're building on smaller lots, and they're building more townhomes and condos as opposed to detached single family homes on these big lots, right? And so that shift has been taking place, for 2-3 years now, because of the affordability crunch, right? And it works out, because if you're building on a smaller lot, you're building cheaper. Maybe you're able to meet buyers where they're at, right? Buyers are also crunched, right? And so maybe you get to a price point that works for some buyers. Builders have been pretty successful at doing that. The problem is they can only do that in some markets. Not all markets allow builders to build on smaller lots. You know, you got lot requirements in some places. You got minimum parking requirements, got all kinds of laws and regulations, around, zoning, right? That prevent builders from leaning into this higher density, in some markets. And so that's part of the difficulty. I think on the regulation front, it's really important to allow builders to adjust to market conditions, in order to see more housing being built.
And what factor do you think rates are playing right now? We have not checked in for a while, and as it sort of dawned on me, the Freddie Mac says the average fixed year or 30-year fixed rate mortgage, 6.63% today. The average 15-year fixed rate mortgage, 5.75%. I mean, we're still hanging out in, the mid to higher sixes. The Federal Reserve has not made a rate cut this calendar year, although you and I traded information over the weekend. I think it was Friday, and I believe it was JP Morgan that came out and said they were anticipating, I believe it was 4 rate cuts before at the end of the year, which I thought was like kind of shocking, but let me go back to the core of that question. Rates are playing what factor at this point? What are builders doing with regard to rates to keep people interested and able to buy homes? Well,
the reality is rates have been fairly stable, right? So they've come down a little bit, but they've been fairly stable. They're ranging in the mid sixes.
The new normal, I think, is sort of where we are right now. Yeah,
exactly. And unless you get a big, shock in economic, data, I don't think we're going to get a big downturn or something. I don't think we're going to get much lower rates, to be totally honest with you. We may get back to the low sixes, maybe. But I don't see it given the current economic environment. And so I think for buyers out there, look, the reality is take advantage of down payment assistance programs. Get your finances in order so you can get the best possible mortgage rate. Look, if the higher your credit score, the better off you are. That's just the bottom line. So those are the things that you got to take advantage of. What are people doing? Well, they're co-buying. They're getting help from parents and family members for their down payment. They're house hacking. Right. So people are taking advantage of all kinds of things. Some people are even switching to adjustable rate mortgages. If you're in the housing market and you don't plan to move for the next 7 years, you get 7 years before your rate adjusts. So people are doing all kinds of things to make it work. What are builders doing? Builders are buying down points for buyers. It's great for potential home buyers, right? If you're a first-time home buyer, you get in a townhouse and you get a rate buy down, it might actually work for you. And so that's what's happening across the country to kind of deal with the affordability challenges. And the reality is incomes are still growing. They're growing at a slower pace, but the fact that prices are falling in some markets is actually bonus for potential home buyers, right? It could help improve housing affordability a little bit. If if incomes are rising, but house prices are falling, that's a bonus. At the same time, inventory is back to its November 2019 levels. And so what does that mean? That means buyers have more options than they've had in a long time. They have more bargaining power, right? And so when you have more bargaining power, you go out and negotiate yourself a great deal. And I think that's how most buyers, I think that's the best advice I give buyers is basically you work with a really good agent, get yourself a really good deal, get yourself a rate buy down. That's what you do. If you're a seller in this market, of course, with more housing inventory, across, you're facing more competition. So you got to get realistic. You got to get realistic with what prices you're going to get in this market. So you got to price it right the first time. And take advantage of technology, right? Great things like virtual floor plans, 3D home tours can definitely make the difference, for your home. People love a nice kitchen, people like a fresh coat of paint will go a long way. And so, I think that's what sellers have to do in the current environment. But again, I think most sellers are sitting pretty, like even in falling price environment, home values are up a lot in most markets, right?
Well, I appreciate your thoughts as always. We'll call it to an end there.